Now here's the thing. These narcissistic relationships change us. They change us in powerful, profound, and tragic ways. I'm not going to sit here like Sister Sunshine and tell you that you're just going to go back to your optimistic, uncensored, loudly laughing, ha 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 version of yourself. Not everyone leaves narcissistic relationships. None of us have the luxury of getting out of all of them. But let's say you get out of one of these, okay? Or you just put up really, really good boundaries. Maybe not full no contact. Maybe not ended it, but like you're super disengaged. Something I'm hearing from a lot of survivors is after they get out of the narcissistic relationships, they say, I feel like I don't know who I am anymore. So let's try it like this. I'm going to put this as a conjecture to you. Imagine you lived amongst a group of really, really tall people, and you're of average height. I don't know, 5'5", 5'6", 5'7", 5'8" if you're a guy. Let's say everyone around you was 6'3" or taller. So over time, your identity became a sort of smaller statured person. You'd automatically stand in the front of group pictures, maybe even ask people to reach stuff for you. Then let's say you moved out of this house of tall folks, and you start living with people with a range of heights, and you're no longer the smallest one in the group. That's going to be a shift. Or, more realistic examples, those of you who might have been in a really, really competitive, intense job, or you started working out with people who were elite athletes, or you went to one of those really, really competitive colleges, and your identity as being really good at something got a little crongled and you thought, maybe I'm not as good as I thought. Context matters. Our identity, our sense of who we are, is very much shaped by the context. Our identity might be like, well, I'm actually not that tall when we lived with the really tall people, pull us away from the tall people, and maybe put us with a mix of heights, and you're like, oh, I'm kind of average height. You might think like you're actually really good as a student, as an athlete, as a person in a given job, but then you're working with the best and most driven, the best of the best, and you're thinking, oh, okay, your identity shifts from like, I thought I was really great at this time, not as good as I thought. Context can shape identity, even though identity feels like something very stable. In a narcissistic relationship, identity is also very much shaped by the toxic stuff that happens. And things that people in these relationships often feel like, I'm too needy, I ask for too much, I'm always doing the wrong thing, I'm socially unskilled, I'm not that smart, I'm not good enough. So think about how your identity was shaped by being in a narcissistic relationship. And while this is very profound when you're growing up, your identities can get formed and reformed by being in a narcissistic relationship in adulthood. You may be confident and well put together, and then get into an adult narcissistic relationship, and then recognize that your identity slides into some really sort of distorted patterns. But that narcissistic relationship kind of becomes a backdrop for your identity, especially when it's an important or significant relationship. And even if it is an identity that doesn't feel good, things like, I'm not good enough, I'm mediocre, I'm selfish, whatever it is, the narcissistic relationship is almost like a pathological scaffold that keeps that identity in place. Then, what if the relationship does end, or you do step away from it? What happens then? I would love to sit here and tell you that it's all moonbeams and rainbows and your identity just pops back into a happy place, like just boom, just put some water on it and it grows and you're confident and you have an accurate self-appraisal and all of that good stuff. But that's not how it unfolds. Most people, when their narcissistic relationship ends, find themselves sort of banging around a little bit, without the dysfunctional scaffold of the narcissistic person. Who are you? Their voices get into your head. You still think of yourself as how they talked about you. But without them being in your life, you might actually now have some competing healthy voices trickling in. But that doesn't mean we just pop out of it and out of that negative identity. And sometimes that sort of lost-ish feeling after one of these relationships ends can even leave you wondering if you were wrong to step away and wonder who you are. In the absence of a new identity, our tendency is to sort of hold on to the one we had, and that's not doing you any favors. This experience of sort of feeling like a lost identity outside of the narcissistic relationship, remember that narcissistic relationships keep us really busy. There's something to do. We have to try to be enough. We have to anticipate their needs. We have to walk on eggshells. We have to ride the roller coaster. Awful as that busy work was, it was sort of something to do. So with even all of that lost, it's like losing a job. And if you've ever lost a job or retired, you know that some of your identity goes with it, and that's not easy. Growth is uncomfortable. And because we try to avoid discomfort, we may avoid growth and remain locked into bad jobs, bad relationships, bad family situations, bad situations of all kinds, because the devil we know and the fear of the unknown and all of that stuff, it doesn't mean we don't want to grow, but we also don't want to be uncomfortable. Trying to reshape our identities post-narcissist can feel really destabilizing. And it's also about finding new things to do, finding yourself. All of this is a central aspect of healing, and it's also one of the hardest. There's no quick pathway on this. Initially, you may find that rumination keeps you stuck in the identity you held in the narcissistic relationship, and that takes time to evaporate. Talk about it, process it, feel the feelings. Don't just distract, but feel them. Slowly start developing new aspects of yourself. You need to move slowly in the post-narcissism landscape because you are learning a new version of yourself. When you aren't invalidated and you are aware that you aren't invalidated, you may be more likely to take more chances, to be a little proud of something you did, to talk to someone new. It takes a minute. Sometimes it can even take years to get there. But having people around you that can point out to you the new things happening and then receiving praise for good things you've done, people who are showing interest in what you have to say, who are not stealing in reality, the more of that happening means you start to trust yourself more too. But this initial sense of, who am I? Like, what am I about? Kind of a loss of identity is a very normal part of the initial grief and of the healing process. Don't let it psych you out. Getting to know yourself is a getting acquainted process with someone new. Figure out what you want, what you like, above all, what you need. You may find out that you actually like to go to bed early, or you like to eat dinner at 4, or recognize that it takes you a minute to warm up at a party, or that you want to avoid violent movies or stay in on a Saturday night. Just basically gave you the Dr. RAMANI handbook there. But all of those patterns may have been so shamed that you started to believe that they weren't true of you, or you tried to negate things that were true of you to become what the narcissistic people in your world wanted and needed for themselves. Healing means it's time to be you. That is the type of part of healing that is much harder to do if you stay in a narcissistic relationships. But please try to find safe spaces where you can be you. And in fact, you may then recognize that your safest relationships are the ones where you can be you and allow your true self to shine. So folks, let's face it, and any one of you who's been through it knows this, is that one of the most difficult things to do in a narcissistic relationship, and an ability that gets taken away in a narcissistic relationship, is to be able to express your needs. So let's start with childhood. Childhood narcissistic relationships. What happened in childhood if you expressed your needs to a narcissistic parent? I'm willing to guess that they were shamed or silenced or resented, and over time, you started to associate the expression of needs with guilt. So then, let's jump into adulthood and your close relationships in adulthood, especially things like partners, boyfriends, girlfriends, fiancés, spouses. Well, in a narcissistic relationship,
You may have been called selfish or needy or demanding or just simply treated with contempt if you raised your needs. So you slowly silence them. You may have felt guilty if you did express them, or you bought the party line that you are selfish. Something similar may also happen with friends and extended family who may even view you as entitled for asserting a fundamental need of any kind. And even if you ask for a need while simultaneously being deeply empathic, or only at a time when it's appropriate, it's like these are not big things, you're still told you're selfish or entitled. This can happen in workplaces too, obviously. If you try to assert something that might be needed in a workplace, you may be treated as though you're difficult, or be told that you're not a team player, or that you're not even that competent, or that you aren't willing to be part of the mission and vision of the company. Meanwhile, the narcissistic abuse is doing exactly what they want and getting all of their needs met. And some people will say, no, actually, Dr. Ramani, it's not true. I am able to express my needs in all relationships, even in my narcissistic relationships. I've worked on it. I'm getting there. But I want you to step back and I want you to ask yourself, am I expressing a need or am I asking for permission? So let's take a look at some examples. Expressing a need would look like to somebody talking maybe to their partner or spouse would say, hey, I have a big deadline on Monday and I need some time to get it done. Please take the kids to the soccer game on Saturday so I can get through this. Asking for permission would be, ugh, I'm so sorry to even ask this. Would it be okay if I worked this weekend? I know it's a pain because it means you have to take the kids to soccer, but would it be okay? Would you be okay with letting me get some work done? And don't worry, I'll keep them busy the rest of the day. Let's try another example. Expressing a need would be telling maybe a family member, I may not be able to stay at Cousin Mary's wedding until the end. Turns out my sitter has to leave at 9 o'clock, so I'm going to bring my own car, and then I'm going to set it up with Tom to bring you home at the end of the wedding so if you want to stay later, you can. Asking for permission would be, is it okay if I leave early? I feel so bad, but my sitter had an emergency. They couldn't stay as late as I needed. Are you okay with it? Are you okay with getting a ride with Tom? Let me know if that's okay. Let's try another. Expressing a need would be, it seems like we can do this meeting by Zoom today. It's pretty straightforward, and then we'll be able to get the feedback to the client before the end of the day. Asking for permission, asking for permission would look like, hey everyone, is there any way we could do Zoom today? I feel bad. I know you're so burned out on screens, but getting everyone into the main office is so involved. And I know I'd be so grateful if all of us didn't have to make the drive. Is that okay? Are you sure you're okay with that? Reflect on those and maybe think of even some of the ways that's showed up for you. Even though we think we're asking for a need, when we turn it into asking for permission, what are we doing? We're often asking for reassurance. Is it okay that I'm asking for this? In most cases, you aren't asking for much. A few hours on a Saturday and asking a parent to be a parent, preparing a person, setting up a different ride for someone to take home, or to do a Zoom meeting that may actually be more convenient for multiple people. The tension created by narcissistic relationships, though, can make it so we are often rolling up to every encounter we have with our hat in hand. This doesn't mean that asking for a need to be met is meant to be a demand. We must have this meeting by Zoom. Nobody wants to drive in. It doesn't mean you're leaving people in the lurch. You did set up, for example, the other ride. You talked to Tom to take the family member home. The other parent is, in fact, the children's parent. And while they may want to go on their 10-mile run, taking children to a soccer game isn't a hardship. Now, asking for permission often means that we believe if we ask them for permission, they may get less angry at us, right? Because you're letting them know, I took care of everything. It's all set. It won't be that bad. So you're still doing all of the work. And you're also still giving them the power, asking them if it's okay. But we have this idea that if they're okay, then everything will be okay. Let's face it. If the other person wants to take their 10-mile run or their bicycle ride or whatever, play tennis, doesn't matter how you ask it. They're still going to push back on the soccer game, whether you ask for permission or put it out there as a need, because that's the issue with needs. Our needs may not always be met. And in a narcissistic relationship, you have the double problem that your needs will be shamed or contorted and guilted. So be prepared for that. Asking or even suggesting a need doesn't mean you're going to get it met, not with anyone, even with healthy people. That other parent may have already had an appointment they actually couldn't break. The family member may not necessarily be comfortable driving with Tom. The company may have a requirement that the meeting be done in person. You may not have known that. But the best way to practice this skill is to practice need expression in healthy relationships first. Unfortunately, narcissistic relationships, especially when they're long-term, they train us to sort of universally walk on eggshells. So even with our chill, cool friend, we may do this like, I know it's difficult, and I know you don't want to drive another 15 minutes, but I just found out I have to work late. So if we could move the restaurant to closer to my office, then we could start at 7:15, which I know you wanted. But I get it if that doesn't work. Could that work? Is that okay? Instead of saying, hey, guess what? My boss just called a late meeting. We could still meet for dinner at 7:15, which I know is better, but we're going to need to move the location to the one closer to my office. A healthy friend, if they can do that, may say, sure, no problem. Or they may find a compassionate way to say, oh no, I don't have my car today, but let's just reschedule to next Wednesday instead. Instead of telling you, you're so selfish for having to work late and so selfish for wanting to move the restaurant. Pay attention to this permission dance. It can leave you still doing all the appeasing and managing of the narcissistic relationship and also maintaining that power imbalance, even when you actually believe you think you're making your needs known. Either way, needs or permission, whatever you're asking for, none of that's going to work in a narcissistic relationship. But this skill becomes really important in healthy relationships. Start with your safe people, your healthy people, and see where it gets you. More often than not, people are going to meet you where you're at. And they're going to say, yeah, we could do it closer. No worries. Because they see the importance of a relationship with you. They value you. They value a human relationship. You meet people where they're at. But remember that asking for permission is a manifestation of that big power gap. Is it okay? Is it okay if I do this? Is it okay if I do that? Right? That's the power difference. This isn't about okay. This is what a need is. Again, may not get met, and that's okay. But by getting yourself in this chronic position of like, is it okay? And that tension, it keeps you in that constantly tense position that these narcissistic relationships put us in. And this exercise and this awareness can be at least a small step to breaking yourself out.
I have had people say to me, I was so confident before this relationship happened to me. I would laugh loudly. I would enjoy life. I made eye contact with people and I smiled and I openly shared my opinion. I wasn't so jumpy and always on the edge of my seat. I knew what I wanted. I knew what I wanted from life. I never had trouble ordering in restaurants. Now I go in the grocery store and I can't even figure out what kind of laundry detergent to buy. One of the worst legacies of narcissistic abuse, in my estimation, is that a person completely loses themselves in these relationships. And they may feel that the experience of going through this relationship can actually change them in ways that hold them back, even after they get out of the relationship, if they do. I remember very clearly once a woman telling me the story of how she loved to tell a joke, even like kind of like an off-color, funny, silly, dirty joke, I guess. She would love throwing parties. She would laugh loudly. She was so curious about the people around her. Decades in a narcissistic relationship of being criticized and being told her laughter was too loud and too rude, of being told she was stupid and intrusive for asking so many questions of other people, of having her cooking, and she was one heck of a cook, of having her cooking ridiculed. And after so many years of that narcissistic indoctrination, she stopped laughing. Not only loudly, she just stopped laughing. She stopped getting together with other people because her confidence had plummeted. And after years of having her cooking criticized, a hobby she absolutely loved and was really good at, she stopped having people over. This woman was once the brightest light in the room, but as long as she was in this marriage, and sadly, people, in this particular case, she's still in the marriage, her light got turned off. In her case, she is not and was not able to find a way out of this particular marriage. And so for her, turning off her spark was safer and easier than being belittled, diminished, gaslighted, and mistreated on a daily basis. She sadly, and really tragically, learned to fade into the background, and to never get her light turned back on, and lives her life in relative isolation with her abuser. This story, I tell you, has been reproduced thousands of times. People who start making so many little micro changes to stay in the narcissistic relationship, to avoid the narcissist rage, whether it's turning down their laughter, becoming more isolated, no longer discussing their dreams or their hopes, no longer adequately taking care of themselves physically, not even getting haircuts or anything on a regular basis, no longer sharing their emotions. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen all of a sudden. It happens gradually, and it really is death by 1,000 cuts. Now, it's far, far worse if this is how you grew up with a narcissistic parent. One pattern I've observed is that there are people who were born, they were temperamentally, naturally exuberant, or there are people out there who are born naturally a little bit reticent, or people who are born naturally vulnerable, and their family silences them or mocks them or shames them or devalues them. Their families of origin, their parents, even their siblings, devalue them for who they are. To grow up with a narcissistic parent or parents or other family members is typically, frankly, is to have to deny your true and authentic self. Many people who grow up like this will say that when they would feel sort of safe, maybe with friends or say family or something like that, their true self would come out. But by and large, when they're home with their family, they would feel censored. They can hear their unkind parents' voices in their head when they finally are just being their true selves, and that's one safe moment. Of course, there's kids from these kinds of families who rebel and walk away from these families, and frankly, I gotta wonder if they're not the ones who often fare the best, because they often set themselves free from these family systems. But there's also a lifelong grief for people who feel that they have to go no contact and walk away from a family because they feel like they no longer have a family. And those who get stuck and don't ever leave the narcissistic family, but get stuck in the cycle of the narcissistic family and never separate, will sometimes never let their true selves out so the world can see their authentic selves. And to me, then I think we're all robbed because we don't get to see those people wholly. So this becomes important to consider from a perspective of healing. If you actually are able to get out of an adult narcissistic relationship or relationships, whether that's a marriage or a fiance or boyfriend or whatever, girlfriend, you may have gone gray rock, you may have gone no contact, you may have set up big boundaries, but now you're more free of that relationship. You may actually find your true self starting to pop out again. After a few months even, that loud laugh of yours may spontaneously pop out. You're like, they're not here. I can laugh loudly. You may quickly close your mouth for laughing loudly, waiting for the narcissist to yell at you even though they're not there, waiting for the narcissist to publicly shame you even though they're out of your life. And you sort of still get that, I laugh too loudly. And you recognize that you still feel their dark shadow peering at you. Over time, you start adjusting. Next time the laugh kind of comes out at you, it's okay. You don't try to hide it. You figure out the dishes can stay in the sink a little bit longer. You can talk about your aspirations amongst your friends or a dream goal you have. Simply put, once the narcissist is gone, you can be you. Healing is interesting because it does take a while. It doesn't happen overnight. For those of you coming out of these relationships, you're going to find that you censor yourself for a long time. You will keep hearing the narcissist's warnings and mockery and criticisms. You'll hear old parental voices. You'll hear the voices of ex-partners. These are the echoes from the past, always telling you that you are wrong, you are bad, you're stupid, you're not enough, you're overreaching, or you just need to keep your mouth shut. Or maybe they're telling you you're an attention seeker, or on, and whatever criticisms they come up with. And many of those damn accusations you got from those narcissists over the years were projections, by the way. The narcissist was calling you out on their own shit. Always pay attention to that projection stuff. It tells you a lot about the narcissist. Now, here's the thing. These narcissistic relationships change us. They change us in powerful, profound, and tragic ways. I'm not going to sit here like Sister Sunshine and tell you that you're just going to go back to your optimistic, uncensored, loudly laughing, ha 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 version of yourself. If you even got a chance to be your true self, because that might have been taken away from you by your parents. You won't go back to some sunshiny, unicorny version of yourself. Narcissistic relationships are a loss of innocence. You may still hold back on that loud laugh of yours for a while. You may still be really anxious if the chicken you cooked for dinner was too dry. You may wonder if you're ignorant and your opinions are foolish, or your dreams are ridiculous, or your emotions are invalid. You will hold back a little. That's what survivors do. They gaslight themselves. And then, as things feel more safe, you will slowly come out of your shell. It will be tentative, and you will smile and think inwardly, I'm okay. I laughed a little bit loud, and it was okay. And you know what? Because that laugh is coming from that deep place we laugh inside, it'll happen again. But this time, you'll also be wiser. You'll be more discerning. You will learn your audience. You will hold out for people who feel safe. You will have an internal, steely sense of strength that comes from surviving these relationships and psychologically living to tell about it. Of knowing the difference between empathy and mimicry. Of knowing when you're being gaslighted as it's happening, rather than recognizing it a couple of days later. You'll learn the power of stepping out of a conversation in which you are being disrespected and invalidated instead of just sitting there and giving that conversation permission. You'll hopefully no longer feel the need to call them out or over-engage with an antagonistic, entitled person, but instead start to learn to use your silence as your strength. Start celebrating your boundaries and exiting, not because you're scared, not because you're shy, but because you respect yourself, and you will commit to no longer giving the best of yourself to someone who consistently tries to dim your light. Here's the deal about life. We can never go backwards, but we can go back one last time and rescue our authentic selves. We can infuse that authentic self with the wisdom of having survived. And yeah, a part of all of us will always be just a little bit jumpy because of these wounds. And you know what? That's okay. Because that little bit of jumpiness is your authentic self saying, it's okay. I got through. These are my battle scars. And I am not putting myself in the line of fire ever again. So I want you to think about it that way. You're running into a burning building and you're going in there to pull your authentic self out, bring it out, take good care of it, and share it with the world.
I mean, empathy is a tough one. One of the best things about a person can really end up doing a number on you in a narcissistic relationship. Now, there is a lot of talk out there in the sphere of the internet about how people in narcissistic relationships are often empaths and very empathic, and some could even argue at times too empathic. And because of this, may get caught up in a never-ending loop of appeasing and soothing, making excuses and justifications for the narcissistic person's behavior. Some of these folks will recall a childhood spent being very attuned to their parents' needs, making sure their parent was okay, and soothed and appeased so the parent wouldn't get angry. Some of the ultra empathy that we witness in folks who get into narcissistic relationships do have their origins in childhood. A childhood where the child had to step into a role they should not have had to attune to and take care of the parents' needs, because that was the only way to stay safe and get attachment needs met. As adulthood came on, this excessive attunement and over-awareness of the needs and emotions of other people would manifest as a hyper-empathy. You know me, I'm all about empathy. Empathy is good. It's the lifeblood of healthy human relationships. But empathy has a lot of pieces to it. Self-awareness, emotional monitoring and regulation, consistency, awareness of the emotional states of other people, awareness of how our behavior impacts other people, caring about other people, and compassion is when that empathy translates into action. But like everything else in the world of psychology, it's on a continuum, and there can be too much of a good thing. To be very empathic can be tricky. It can mean subjugating your needs ahead of the needs of others, exhausting yourself trying to remain attuned all the time to other people and what they need and want, excessively monitoring yourself so you never say something wrong, and when you do, spending hours, days, or weeks ruminating about a misstep that you have made, that you might think you made socially. Empathy, sadly, puts a person at risk for getting stuck in a narcissistic relationship. Narcissistic people love empathic people because they can get away with so much with them. Empathic people make lots of justifications and then time passes, and then before you know it, the empathic person is firmly stuck. They may make excuses about the abyss of the narcissistic person's history, of their backstory, of their bad day, you name it. And it's also baked into the nature of the empathic person to be empathic, and they're more likely to become anxious, depressed, self-doubting, and self-blaming than the empathic person is to start seeing the situation clearly, because it is so at odds with their empathy to see a narcissistic relationship clearly. And the narcissistic relationship can evoke guilt and pity and a desire to fix and rescue and be better and make it better. But this creates a real challenge for a person who's very empathic, right? You think, I not only don't want to lose my empathy, I don't think I could. You probably can't, and you don't want to. It's a good thing. But there is then the fear that because of that, you may fall back into another narcissistic relationship or get sucked back into the one you were already in. So when you get into something new, maybe a new relationship or friendship or workplace, what situation, you may find that you're really on edge. Being aware that you're an empathic person, but also not wanting to end up in another messy narcissistic relationship. It then begs the issue of whether you are going from being very empathic to experiencing this sense of hypervigilance. And hypervigilance is a sort of edge of your seat hyper-monitoring that we often observe in trauma survivors who are chronically on edge and very, very aware and vigilant and monitoring all that's happening around them. The right answer is probably both. The empathy is not going to go away. It's part of who you are. Though what can happen is that the empathic person feels more guilty or more numb after a narcissistic relationship, but you remain empathic. I have worked with many, many survivors who have really been through it, and their empathy just didn't go away. But what came in alongside it was this vigilance, this intense overfocus on making sure they weren't missing it, but also making sure people are okay. It makes sense. That vigilance to the needs of other people is also a safety behavior. And it's a safety behavior that people who come up in narcissistic relationships often have. So what the hell are empathic people supposed to do? Slow down, slow way down. Have your smaller, trusted central core of people who you do trust and feel safe with. Your empathy is this gift that will get taken advantage of. So taking your time becomes important. Instead of that sort of edge of your seat vigilance, it becomes about taking it slow, remaining empathic, and also recognizing that it is okay to step away. This is a chronic crisis for empathic folks who feel that stepping away from someone who is behaving in an entitled, uncomfortable, invalidating, or manipulative way means that you're doing something that's not nice, that you're not doing the right thing, that you have to recognize that everyone is going through something, and maybe that because of that, you can just give them a chance. You can give them a chance by taking it very, very, very slow. And if they pressure you to step up the pace or intensify the relationship, you can say, it's hard, but you can say that slow is what works. And they may just get frustrated and walk away. They may also try to bully you and bring you to their side of thinking, but you want to be resistant. The high levels of empathy in a narcissistic relationship often do morph into vigilance as you try to get it right, chronically monitor the narcissistic person's needs. And then in future relationships, you may find yourself stuck between empathy and vigilance. Many empathic people feel exhausted after narcissistic relationships, feeling that they can't turn their empathy off, but are afraid of being played again, so they may isolate. Being more careful isn't a bad thing, but it's important to not overcorrect either and cut yourself off from the world and the possibility of other human relationships. Narcissistic relationships are a place where your empathy becomes exhausting and make it impossible to cut away without feeling sick. It can happen, but it takes a minute. And it can mean the rumination and fear of whether you hurt the narcissist can dog you for a long time. Your empathy is a gift, and the gift carries an opportunity cost in narcissistic relationships. But save that gift for the people who will reciprocate and treasure it. And give your nervous system a break, because you can't stay vigilant forever.
I want you to imagine the layers of an onion peeling away layer after layer until you get to the sort of the more solid core of the onion. Now I want you to imagine that onion is you, and that what is being peeled away layer after layer are the parts of you that make you you. To be in a narcissistic relationship, sadly, it's sort of finding yourself in a relationship that is peeling away the layers of you and then discarding them. Your humor, quirks, aspirations, emotions, beliefs, preferences, and hopes. One layer after the other. It's the only way the relationship with any narcissistic person can work. But here's the problem. It's not what you signed up for. You didn't know that that was what was happening. It wasn't literally like you said, okay, this year, I'm just going to peel it all away. I'm going to discard all of my quirks. Next year, I'm going to get rid of all of my emotions. All narcissistic relationships, again, are a gradual process of undoing you. You may have written it off as compromise or obedience, or you internalized the shame that was thrown at you for doing those things. When we are in a narcissistic relationship, all of our layers get pulled away and discarded. And that just leaves a sort of functionary core. which is consistent with what lots of survivors of narcissistic relationships say. They say, I sometimes feel like I'm going through the motions of life. I get up, I keep the trains running on time, but I'm often confused, and maybe this is as good as life gets. It's not. First, you may wonder, why does this happen? Why did my onion layers just all get to go away? Well, because there's only one reality that's permitted in a narcissistic relationship, and that's theirs. These relationships are a slow eradication using a combination of techniques: invalidation, shifting between good and bad days, gaslighting, manipulation, making you believe you want the same things as them, shaming you for your ambition, calling you overly dramatic when you show emotion, insulting you when you attempt or try something new, future faking you. These things take time. And when they are done, you start to believe that if I'm just better, if I was just less emotional, less challenging, if I just go along with what they want, if I keep things just so, then all of this will be okay. The good day, bad day thing happens because they don't give a damn about you as a separate person. So if by luck your interests happen to be aligned with theirs, or you make them look good or feel good, well, then that's a good day in your relationship. On most other days, your needs, your existence, your wants, it's an affront to them. And that's when you see all of the ugly narcissistic patterns come at you. But those good days make you think that maybe there is some control in this process for you. There isn't. No more than you can control the weather. It's their emotional space. You're just leasing space in it, and they reserve the right to evict you at any time you want and come in and tell you you're not doing your place right. So the longer-term survivor becomes the proverbial shell of themselves, that very inside core of the layered onion, that robot part of you that can get things done, but it's missing the poetry that's you. Your big laughter and capacity for joy and the silliness and the adventure and the courage and the ambition, all that stuff that's you, because none of that is permissible in a narcissistic relationship. The part that basically acts as a psychological servant to the narcissistic people, past and present, that's all that gets left after a while. I've worked with a lot of long-term survivors, those who have endured it from childhood, those in long-term committed relationships. And this shell, functioning, robotic core experience haunts many of them, which is why a major part of healing is to give yourself permission to find even the smallest joys and breathe them in, to journal anything to find yourself and find your way back to yourself. This whole process pisses me off to no end. Sure, we can get gaslighted and raged at and betrayed and cheated on and all of the misery that is the narcissistic relationship. But the sacrifice of so many people's good stuff, good people's good stuff, that's what angers me. The wake-up call for the world has to be that there's no pleasing them. To please a narcissistic person means that we have to become mind readers who have no needs, no feelings, no individuality, no autonomy, no hopes, no dreams, no aspirations, no achievements. And that we show up with what they want, when they want. We look the way they want, cook the way they want, work the way they want, screw the way they want, clean the way they want. Again, these relationships are psychological servitude. And what we know about servitude is that the employers, masters, people in charge have no interest in the sovereignty and separateness of the servant. They want them to do their job quietly and get out. That is not a relationship. That is a dehumanizing worker setup. You deserve better. I deserve better. We all deserve better. And the world deserves and needs to see you and your gifts. Start finding all those layers that were peeled away and find them and start gluing them back on. This is a slow, painful, arduous process, especially if this layer chopping happened as early as childhood. Finding your layers and gluing them back on is an act of defiance, of rebellion, and of salvation. The world needs the survivors to find their voices again, because without that, all we're going to get to hear is the noise, the anger, and the rage of the narcissistic folks amongst us. Thanks again.